Good morning and welcome to session 5 in our Essential Skills Insight series. This session will be on knowledge management for engineers and presented by Paul Comiskey. So thank you for joining us this morning, and I'd like to hand over now to Paul Comiskey. Thank you.
Thanks, Elva. Morning, folks. So we just do a quick introduction to myself. So this year, 40 years working in military, marine, academic and industry organizations. So I'm both a qualified engineer and physicist and have a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and I'm Oxford TRIZ certified. Have worked in a number of countries, as you can see there, and then my expertise would be in RF and plasma systems, knowledge management, analytical problem solving, inventive thinking or TRIZ, and then systems and critical thinking. So our company, Socrates Solutions, we provide technical and professional skills training and design services to both the higher education sector and to industry. So this half of 2021, we're working with Maynooth, delivering their knowledge management module on their master's program for electronic engineering. We're also working with Compliance Engineering Ireland, and we deliver advanced RF design training for industry through Midas, which is our Trinity partner. And we're hoping, or we're planning to work in Saudi Arabia next year in KAUST University doing the same. University of Limerick then problem solving, and then you can see TU Dublin various electrical and electromechanical programs. Nanjing, then I teach the semiconductor physics module for them. Training management services then with a construction management company here in Dublin, and then the ETBs, various curriculums and lean training, and then Irish Manufacturing Research. We're a member and partner with them, training partner, and two of us, including myself, sit on the robotics steering committee. And then for Engineers Ireland, we teach critical thinking, knowledge management and analytical problem solving. So today we're going to look at two modules from the full course. The first one being, if you like, the introduction module, which obviously has its own logic. And then we're going to look at one of the more abstract models for knowledge management, the seki and model. So what is knowledge management? So from our own Oscar Wilde, education is an admirable thing, but it is worth remembering from time to time that nothing that is worth knowing can be taught. And quite a wise statement there from Oscar. So if you look at the Kanoko survey 2014, and now the 2020 survey has just been published, but it hasn't been published, but it has been released. I got a copy of it. It's not significantly different in breakdown. Obviously the data is different, but the percentage breakdown is similar. So you can see this is a survey that this company does every 5 or 6 years across large companies, predominantly in Europe and the US. And if you look at the elements from that survey that are judged as a high priority in these companies from a knowledge management perspective, connecting people through networks and communities is 22%. Learning from experience, 17% of the respondents held that as a high priority. Improving access to documents, 15%. Knowledge retention, 14%, and then equal 9% creation and provision of best practice, and then innovation. So below that, you can see there's a drop off to 5, 3, 2, and 1% for other priorities within companies. So if you look at those top 6, you can see connecting people, learning from experience, improving access to information or documentation, the ability to retain knowledge within the company, creating best practice, and the ability to innovate are considered 6 core elements of knowledge management by these 178 respondents. So when communicating knowledge management strategy and tactics within a business environment, I always find it's best to avoid the terminology, and it's to try and connect the knowledge management strategy directly to the business activities. So for example, if you look at coordination within a business, so the organization wanting to be able to coordinate its activities and maintain objectives that are shared with its customers, and then hand off and keep track of progress. The key activities there, or some of the key activities, would be collaboration and document and information management, for example. And then if you look at memory within an organization, the organization needs to be able to have key capability in such items as skills, stakeholder relationships, experience, and expertise. And to that, I suppose, to that point, you can see that the key business issues and activities are skills, skills of the workforce, VOC, which is the voice of the customer, and then maintaining the capability or the knowledge retention in the company. And then if you look at learning from an organization perspective, it needs to be able to learn and grow internally. And the key activities here are continuous improvement. So that's the stuff around, Lean and Six Sigma, the standardization also in the same discipline, and then stuff around, development of breakthrough products and services or innovation. So you can see some sample definitions here from various, a mix of academics and folks who work in industry. So knowledge management is collaboration and an integrated approach to creation, capturing, organizing, and accessing intellectual assets. Another definition then would say it's the process whereby we manage human-centered assets. So that's knowledge centered around the human. And the function then is to guard and grow knowledge owned by individuals. So this is where the whole thing around intellectual property rights, copyright, trademarks and trade secrets and so on come in. And where possible, to transfer the asset into a form which can be more readily shared within the company. Knowledge management then is also considered a concept under which information is turned into actionable knowledge. So it's the ability not just to have it from an intellectual perspective, but to make it actionable within the company. Another definition then, leveraging collective wisdom to increase responsiveness and innovation. So the ability to use the collective shared knowledge within the organization to increase the level at which the company innovates. Tools and techniques and strategies to retain, analyze, organize, improve, and share business expertise. And then lastly, then the creation and subsequent management of an environment that encourages knowledge to be created, shared, enhanced, and organized. So there is a knowledge management ISO standard. It's the ISO standard 30401. And in that standard, it defines knowledge very simply as a human or organizational asset. Then it says the knowledge can be individual, collective, or organizational. It talks about examples of knowledge, including insights and know-how. And then it says knowledge is acquired through learning or experience. So all of that seems quite straightforward and logical. And then it looks at the management of knowledge as management with regard to knowledge, using a systemic and holistic approach to improve results in learning. And it also talks about optimizing the identification, creation, analysis, representation, distribution, and so on, to create organizational value. Here's my definition of knowledge management. So knowledge management is the essence of managing work. So when we look at managing work, what do we mean by that? It's stuff around workplace organization, management best practice, or we used to call it when I was a manager, managing through people, or MTP. Adoption of lean principles, so the ability to reduce waste and implement small improvements. The Six Sigma piece is around understanding your variation and reducing that variation, and then problem solving cadence. So all of that is managing your work, whilst at the same time paying attention and giving due consideration to how the intangible assets, i.e. the knowledge, and here we're talking about what do we mean by intangible. So if you look here, intangible means often it's tacit knowledge. So it's not knowledge that's documented, it's not well understood, and it's not widely known amongst the organization. And then what do we mean by knowledge? It's capturing the knowledge, both the tacit and explicit knowledge separately, and then transferring or sharing both the tacit and explicit knowledge. And then the effects and supports the work. So these assets then affect and support the work. And how is it shared and learned by the wider organization? This is the whole thing around becoming a learning organization and creating what they call organizational memory. So there's a lot in, if you look at that definition, there's a lot going on. And that's kind of the essence from my perspective, what knowledge management is. So it's multidisciplinary in nature. So you're looking at a mix of strategies, tools, and techniques. For example, storytelling. So the ability to tell good stories, particularly if you're trying to transfer tacit knowledge. Mentoring programs, strong skills mentoring programs within the organization. Learning to learn, learning to teach. Artificial intelligence, data analysis, skills and competency analysis separately. Okay. So to be able to analyze skills and competency within the organization separately. It also draws from a diverse range of fields like organizational science, cognitive science, computer science, engineering, physics, IT, technical writing, education, training, collaboration, anthropology, sociology, and library science. So the library science is around the whole way we do research, for example. And then if you look at the ISO standard, it also calls out, some of the disciplines we've just mentioned previously, but it talks, interestingly enough, I thought these were very interesting. It talks about innovation management, risk management, quality management. So very often these are not considered part of knowledge management, but certainly, managing quality, risk, and innovation within an organization is are key components of knowledge management. Also from the standard, it talks a lot about behaviors and cultures, right? So it's really what it's poking at here is that if you don't have the right culture and the right behaviors demonstrated by your leaders, certainly, but also by your middle managers, you're not going to be able to implement a strong knowledge management program and ethos within a company. So if we look at this graph or map here, so you can see on the y-axis, we're looking at rate of change. So in this case, it's rate of change of technology. So we're looking at a technology SME or FDI company, and you're starting off here with a steady change of technology, which requires expertise across multiple disciplines, going into frequent change requiring advanced skills and adaptive problem solving, and then going into rapid technology change, which requires the ability to innovate and the new emerging skills, whether they be on robotics, automation, blockchain, or AI, machine learning, additive manufacturing, etc., etc. And then on the x-axis, you can see from an expanding business segment perspective, you've got local business, which would be normal with any company. You have your expanding client base and geos, and then global operations with looking for new business in different segments. And across this landscape, you're going to want to have people who are developing at core, advanced, and master level, both technically and professionally. And then if you look at Engineers Ireland CPD criteria, they have 7 pillars, okay, and they're called out there, and there's a lot of information on their website on that. But you can see that pillar 6 is knowledge sharing and knowledge management. So they've taken one of the 7 pillars for CPD as being an important pillar, as being knowledge sharing and knowledge management. And again, each of the CPD pillars are split into an A, B, and C strand, if you like. The A strand, in this case, talks to having the physical facilities and tools to access and share knowledge. So that's around meetings, brainstorming. The tools might be stuff like whiteboards, flip charts, etc. So really, what they're saying here is you need to have a separate toolkit for both tacit and explicit knowledge sharing within the organization. If you look at the B criterion around knowledge management strategy and structure, what they're saying here is a knowledge management strategy needs to be in place. So the senior management team that lead the company, basically, they need to have an articulated strategy for the company around knowledge management. And then what are your departmental boundaries? Is there a facility to have networks and learning across boundaries and collaboration across boundaries? And then, of course, very importantly, within any company, are there metrics that will measure the knowledge management performance within the company? And then, excuse me, criterion C then is around knowledge management being integrated formally into the business activities. So how does the business benefit from this knowledge management. So, you know, do you have plans for acquiring knowledge where there's knowledge deficits, you know, within your company? Do you have good ideas and best evidence shared? Is there commercial potential of what your organization knows? So in other words, if there's new innovations or new knowledge being developed by the company, is it being shared? And more importantly, is it being patented or, you know, protected from an IP perspective? So for all of this, right, if you're trying to implement a knowledge management program within a company, you need to have a framework, and the framework then will typically be implemented with phases. I've done this 3 times in 3 different technology companies, and in each case, it's taken about 2 years, and 2 years is pretty fast, and it would be considered very fast actually. So, you know, you're going through a prepare phase, a design, align, share, perform, memorize. Now you can change the language on these phases. These phases can have different language. But you can see in the prepare phase, you're looking at forming your team, mapping your current landscape, designing the framework, and a risk and gap analysis, and so on. And then, you know, with the design align phase, you're into expert finders, skills and competency assessments, introducing new platforms, you know, just tacit learning plans and so on. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but you can see you set out a framework, and then you kind of ensure that your team and your management team are aligned on the framework, and then you start on the journey and you articulate the journey to the employees of the company. And typically visually, the best way to articulate a journey is visually, and you tell them where they are in the journey, and you tell them what the journey what's going to happen on the journey, and you show that the whole intent of the framework and the phases within the framework is to build a stronger company, but also build a learning organization, so that ultimately you're trying to get to this triple loop learning and this organizational memory phase towards the end. And if you can do this in 2 years, you've done it unbelievably fast. 2 years is, you know, and most companies are talking about 5 to 7 years really here. There's interesting, I might talk to you about skills versus competency in a bit. So there's a framework there anyway. Now this framework is just generic. You can change this framework. This framework should always be designed to fit the company, both the culture and the technology or the business model that the company has. You know, there's no point in just having this framework and then trying to force it into an organization. You have to make sure that it suits the particular structure of the company and the technology, particularly that the company is basing its business around. So if we talk a little bit about, and maybe I'll go to the next. So if we look at this Nonaka model, right? So I'm skipping around a bit here, but if you look at the Nonaka, so Nonaka was a Japanese scientist, Japanese engineer, and he certainly is, to my knowledge, is still alive. So he studied in Japan, and then he went and worked and lived, and he still lives in America. And he wrote a lot about knowledge management from a technology perspective. Now, he would have worked in, you know, a lot of the big Japanese companies, you know, Honda, Toyota. I think he did some work in Toyota, Canon. So some of the big names that we'd be familiar with. And if you think about it, he was looking at how knowledge was being shared within those companies, and he came up with this model called the seki model. So the S standing for socialization, the E standing for externalization, the C standing for combination, and the I standing for internalization. And what he was doing was he was looking at kind of on an XY graph, if you like. He was looking at context versus understanding. So he was basically saying, look, the lowest form of information is data. It's not even information. It's just data which doesn't have any context. As soon as you give the data some context, it becomes information, right? And then as soon as you start using that information in a work environment, you know, whether it's, with peer-to-peer learning, on-the-job training, applying the information, then it becomes knowledge, right? So the knowledge is only when you actually use it in a work environment, is what he was saying. And you don't necessarily have to go from knowledge into wisdom. It may or may not happen. It's not really that important. The important thing is that you very quickly on they call this the continuum of knowledge. I think I've headed it here, the continuum of understanding, but it's really at the continuum of knowledge. And you really want to get into the knowledge space fast. So you want to get out of the data information space, preferably in hours, not even in days, and you want to be in this space straight away. And this is really important. And then he talked a lot about tacit knowledge, right? So, the data being meaningless on its own, the data then with the context being information, and then the knowledge then within the company being the ability to act on this information. And the tacit knowledge, sometimes the knowledge is very tacit, and it's the tacit knowledge within a company that gives you the competitive advantage. And there's different levels of tacitness. Sometimes the tacit is very deep and very ingrained psychologically within an organization and within individuals, right? But converting or taking this tacit knowledge and then converting it into explicit knowledge is what they call knowledge conversion. And the skills that we learn or experience, they're very often initially very tacit, right? And it's only through practice and applying those skills that we can make those skills become more explicit. Again, this is just talking to the levels of tacitness, whether it's cognitive, technical, or social. So tacit can be, very social, depending on, the culture of both the country, not just the organization, but the country that you're in. Obviously, the levels of tacit, technical tacit would be, the experience, the practice, hard to pin down skills. And then the whole thing around cognitive tacit is around the beliefs of the individual, their ideas and their values. And then Nonaka looked at it, from a two-dimensional model. So he was basically saying, and Takuchi was also working with him at the same time. And they weren't just doing this from an academic perspective. They were working in these Japanese companies studying this. And they were saying that the tacit to tacit, so when people learn when they learn knowledge or when they gain knowledge first, typically on something new, they're gaining it in a social environment. So they're working with a master craftsperson or a master engineer, and they're learning it from a peer or master to apprenticeship relationship. And this is a really powerful part of learning. And Nonaka was saying that the socialization context here is really important. So, companies will actually make, good companies will actually make attempts to actually improve this socialization space, or BAS they call it. So if you look at canteens, for example, in large, particularly in American companies, the way they actually design the canteens is not haphazard. They actually want the canteen, they want their employees, it's counterintuitive, they want their employees to spend more time in the canteen, not less, because in the canteen is where a lot of the socialization happens and the tacit to tacit transfer happens. And then you're looking at tacit to explicit transfer, right? Which is the externalization. And again, companies, they spend a lot of effort here where they want the tacit knowledge from the individuals, the experts, to be made explicit and shared amongst the organization. So this is the tacit to explicit conversion. And then the whole thing around explicit to explicit, which is combination. So it's taking this explicit knowledge and then making it more explicit through SOPs, standing operating procedures, specs, etc. And then finally, the internalization. So the individuals now are internalizing what they've learned. They're seeing it in its explicit form. And then they're seeing, by experimentation or innovation, they're seeing new ways of actually doing something that was done a traditional way back here. And then what they're doing is they're converting that knowledge back into tacit knowledge, and it starts all over again. And this cycle of knowledge, in a good company, this it's not easy to do, right? And it's, you can't contrive to force it, right? But what you do in a good company is you try and put in interventions, I call it. So you try and have interventions here, you try and have interventions here. In fairness to companies, they're very good here. Like, you don't need any interventions here. Like, a good, strong technology company will do this without any thought, because they're just super good at it. But there's certain times you need to have help. You need help here, a little bit of help here, definitely a bit of help here, right, within the company to do this. Um, and then it's interesting. I was looking at this the other day. I was teaching some stuff on learning in another class I was doing, and I was looking at Kolb's learning cycle, which is pretty, it's pretty well known in the L&D kind of world, if you like. And there's huge similarities here. So if you look at the Kolb learning cycle, you're looking at somebody having a concrete experience, right, on the factory floor, for example, reflecting on it. And then based on that reflective observation, expanding on the theory of what's actually happening, in the physics, the chemistry, engineering theory, whatever, and then conceptualizing or extracting that, then pragmatically looking at ways to actually do something different by experimentation. So, Kolb was a great person to say that, okay, we have dominant learning styles, some of us are activists, some of us are reflectors, whatever. But when you're learning, you're actually going through all four styles of learning, right? And actually, if you look back here, this is not the same thing, right? But when you're actually in a learning organization, you're going through all four types of learning, but you're also going through the socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization within that company. So there is a definite strong link between those two. And then I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can see that it was interesting that I thought this was a great insight. I took this out of his knowledge creating company book, which is a really good, it's a great read actually. He believed that the middle managers within companies, and he was talking both Japanese and American companies, they need to synthesize the tacit knowledge of both the frontline employees, so the employees that are at the front line, and the senior executives to make it explicit. So he was saying they're the link between the employees who are on the front line, who are pretty much all the knowledge they have is tacit, and he needs to be able. When I said that the middle managers need to be able to make that knowledge explicit for the senior companies, so that it can be incorporated into the new technologies and products. So if there's a disconnect between what the tacit learning is on the factory floor, for want of a better word, to the senior management, the company it'll go bust, effectively. It'll just go bust. So he was saying that the middle managers are actually the most important managers in the company, not the senior managers, because they're the link, they're the knowledge engineers. So I think that's a really important insight. So the lesson there is, stop beating up on your middle managers, and appreciate them more and equip them more to be this link to the senior management team. Again, this just goes through what we were talking about earlier around the different phases of conversion, the socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. Like, in my experiences, one thing I've noticed in my experience working in I suppose mostly multinationals from a manufacturing perspective is you should never do the tacit to explicit conversion too early. So when you're learning a new technology, or learning a new skill, or learning something that's very new, whether it be in the engineering space, the chemistry space, the physics space, doesn't matter, don't convert it. So converting it to explicit knowledge is a mistake. If you do it too soon, you should be in the tacit space for months and months and months before you even think about converting it. Now, it will need to be converted, but the great companies will want, and in fact, in some cases, force it to stay in the tacit space for as long as possible, because they want it to be shared tacitly, because the more powerful sharing is the tacit sharing, not the explicit sharing. Now you have to do all this stuff. You have to do your explicit sharing. You have to document it, with the combination. And then maybe if you're lucky and you have a really good learning organization, you may be able to do the internalization. That's a bonus, but you should certainly do 1, 2, and 3. 4 is a bonus. So if you look at the models, so we just talked about the seki model, which is the Nonaka model. It's often called the seki model. It's the same one. There are many other models. So you can see we've got Chow's sense making one, the WIG model, the BISO one, which we'll talk about in a minute. The European Foundation of Quality Management one, we'll talk about that now. And then there's a list of other ones there. I won't read them out. And then you can see the Wang and No, which is actually one I kind of like. So if we look at the EFQM model, right? So how does this look? So really what they're looking at here is they're examining how knowledge management is used to obtain the goals of an organization. So the role of knowledge management is to be an enabler that supports the company in achieving its goals. And for that to happen, so to have these results, key performance indicators and so on for the customers and for the wider society, you have to have enablers. So it's saying that the enablers in this model are the leadership team, the employees, having good strategy, tactics, and policy, having the partnerships and resources, outside of the company, into maybe academia or whatever, and then having good systems and processes. And if you have those enablers, you're going to get good results. Now, that's a very simple, basic model. If we look at the Wang and No model, here they're talking more about the ability to share. So they're saying if you want a sharing organization, you need to be aware of certain environmental factors. So you need to be aware of organizational factors, interpersonal team factors, and then cultural factors. And you need to understand, is there motivation within the organization, particularly with the knowledge owners, to share the knowledge, right? So do they have benefits from sharing? Is there a trust that they want to share? Is there team cohesiveness? And then the individual factors that play into that would be, what's the education level within the organization, work experience, personality, evaluation, impression management, and perceptions. And only then would you understand what your knowledge sharing behaviors are, in relation to the company. And then if we look at this model here, which is quite an interesting model because it's a three-dimensional model. So you can see it's got on the y-axis here, if you like, it's got codification. On the x-axis here, it's got abstraction. And then on the z-axis, which is kind of this way, if you like, here, it's got diffusion. And what they're saying here is that this model is effectively trying to link codification, which is content management, with diffusion, which is information management, and on the third axis, then knowledge management. So if you were to look at it from a simple perspective, I sketched it out there this morning just to make it a little bit easier. So you can see what they're saying is when you're codifying the knowledge, you're categorizing it. When you're diffusing the knowledge within the organization, you're sharing it, right, on the z-axis here. And then when you're abstracting the knowledge, or you're using abstraction as part of your process, you're creating new knowledge. And what Biso was saying was that in this model here, you're doing all three at the same time, but his point was that you don't want to be doing too much of one over the other. So for example, if you look at this axis, you don't necessarily want all axes to be equal in length. So you may decide that you're doing, so for example, if you do too much codification of the knowledge, so if you make it too explicit, it's harder to share actually, and the science will show that. So, these axes should never be equal in length. So I would be saying, codify your knowledge, but don't over codify so that you can have the tacit sharing. and don't under codify, right? So that you're not able to abstract it well. And this is what Bezo was poking at here, right? This is a really, really powerful model. It doesn't get enough attention, actually. Most companies will focus on the two, that, you know, humans, we're all humans, including the people who run these companies, right? But if you come back here, humans like that. I mean, it takes a lot for them to assimilate it and to understand it maybe, but they like it because it's flat, it's two-dimensional, and it's going, you know, clockwise, is it? It's going clockwise, right? So they can kind of relate to that. It's like a clock going around in a circle, and it's two-dimensional. As soon as you put up something in 3 dimensions, they kind of get a little bit uneasy, because it's not that they don't understand it, but they find it hard to see how that can be implemented in practice. But actually, I would say to companies, in fact, you need to do both. You need to do the two-dimensional seki piece, and then you need to do the three-dimensional you know, piece as well, and you just need to make sure that you're doing both. Just on that, if you take this iSpace model here, and then you look at it, what he was actually doing was he was generating what they call a social learning cycle. So he was saying that, you know, if you look at it in 6 phases, initially what you're doing is you're identifying threats and opportunities. So this is the whole thing around I think they call it SWOT analysis, you know, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And then, excuse me, in your problem solving, you're codifying what you've learned. And then in your abstraction, you're doing problem solving and abstraction together, right? To gain new insights. And then in your diffusion, you're sharing these newly created insights to the wider population. And then in the absorbing, you're learning by doing or learning by using. And then the impact then is the ability to embed the abstract knowledge in concrete practices. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about, I didn't talk about it earlier. I meant to talk about it. So we were we're talking a little bit earlier around the framework. So if I go back up to this. So one of the big things you need to do in a company is you need to map skills and competency, right? So in an organization, there's no point in, you know, talking about all this knowledge management stuff you're going to do if you don't understand what are the skills I have in the organization, what are the skills gaps I have, right? And then more importantly, what are the competencies I have and what are the competency gaps? So when companies ask me, the first thing they'll ask is, tell me the difference between the two, right? So, you know, I say to them, look, skill is manual and cognitive. So skill is a mix of a manual and cognitive skill, you know, done with your hands and your mind. Competency is when you are able to demonstrate that skill to give a tangible output for the company. So the competency is how the company benefits from a business perspective from that skill. So you should always do the skills and competency analysis separately. And here's the trick. You do the skills analysis first. You go into the company, you say, okay, give me your top 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 disciplines. It's usually around 50. So give me your top 50 disciplines. And for each of those disciplines, you do your skills analysis. So each discipline will have, you know, certainly, you know, anywhere between 50 and 100 skills. It's dead simple to do it, honestly. You could easily do a discipline in, you know, a day or two. Easy. And then you assess those skills at core, advanced, and master level. And when you've done that, so literally you could do that in an organization in 3 months, no bother. And then the important thing is when you've done that, and obviously you need to analyze what's coming out of it and you need to see your gaps and all the rest, you then don't get all paranoid about having to do the competency assessments. All you have to do is then say, okay, based on what I've seen there and the gaps, what are the 3 to 5, I would say 5 max competencies I need to assess for this company? And typically, they're always the same. Typically, they're problem solving, automation, if it's a technology industry, and you know, it might be something around, could be leadership, right? It's usually something behavioral. It could be team development, right? So let's say it's automation, problem solving, team development. Then you do competency assessments, but you only do them on those 3 disciplines because that's all you need to do. So you do the skills assessment on everything, and you do the competency assessment on 3 to 5 max, and you're done. So I just wanted to, I forgot to cover that earlier. I just wanted to cover that. And then I suppose the last thing to talk to is I want us to be aware, you know, as an organization in the West, right? And that includes the wider West as well, you know, out to America and off into, to a certain extent, into Eastern Europe and Russia. We tend to be very vertical in our thinking, right? So we have this, what they call Aristotelian approach to logic, right? You know, where, you know, you've episteme is scientific knowledge, this is craft knowledge, and this is practical knowledge, right? And we have morality is separate from all of this. It's not that morality isn't important, it's very important, but it's separate to these 3 knowledges, if you like. And this is part of the reason we have a problem with the environment now, is because we've separated this from morality, right? Whereas in the Chinese, well, Confucius was Chinese, but in the Chinese and Japanese and Taiwanese and Korean Eastern way of thinking, they don't look at it vertically. They look at it around Shili, which is acting creatively, Renly, which is acting ethically, and Woolley, which is acting efficiently. And then they have this thing about timely balance. So you basically move over and back at the right time between the different Lees. Okay, so you've Ren Li, you've Wu Li, and you've Shi Li or Shu Li. And this is around pragmatism, right? So what's interesting about this is if you actually go back up to this, it's the same. There's the Wu Li, right? There's the Ren Li, and there's the Shi Li, actually. So we'll stop there. And again, thanks for your attention, and we'll move to questions.